I remember Obama, 2008. That was exciting. That was fun. This is different. This is urgent.
All right, hi, this is Ryan. Welcome to Generational Talk. This is our special episode focusing on the 2020 election. We've covered all types of things from the generations. We had episodes focused on Gen X, Boomers, Millennials, and then that somehow segued into focusing on the protests, coronavirus. So a lot of pretty much most of the disasters of 2020. So you guys didn't think we were going to avoid this issue. This is a big one. I want to start off with a show of hands. Do you think Donald Trump will win re-election?
Maybe.
Okay, so that's 3. All right, who believes Joe Biden will win?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe. Yeah.
All right. So, okay, we'll start with Dan. You're vocal with the maybe. Let's start with you. Why do you think maybe will win?
Sure. Well, I'm Dan Cava, and I think we're supposed to introduce ourselves a little bit with our generation. I think I'm a cusper,
Yes.
or I'm an early millennial, 1981er.
I decided that we're Millennial X. We're both 81ers.
I'll take that. An Xennial, whatever. My intellect says that Joe Biden has the clearest path to victory. I was on 270towin.com today playing around with this interactive electoral map. And as I kind of switched the states from red to blue again and factoring in all the stuff that we've heard recently, it seems likely that the path to winning is narrow for Donald Trump. But for me, there are some vibey redundancies with 2016. I see some of the same sort of cultural blind spots. I see some of the same percolations, and my wife and I, who Missy is here as well. Hey, babe. We were talking about some of these, intangibles, and I'd love to hear Missy talk about this as well, but some of the intangibles of the kind of anecdotal support for Donald Trump that we're running into. There's a lot of we live in North Carolina, but we're running into a lot of surprise Trump voters, folks in our sphere who we wouldn't think would be voting for Donald Trump. And then when you ask them, did you vote already? Yeah, I did. Well, who'd you vote for? Well, I voted for Trump. That's happened more times than I expected, a lot more times. And so there is a simmering for me. There's a level of enthusiasm. I don't think we can underestimate the extent to which folks like Donald Trump, who have essentially captured the iconography of the American flag, and have managed to take some of the more obscure aspects of the cultural left and really paint all of the left with those brushes, and the effect that that's having on regular standard Americans. And so for example, Ryan and I were talking about this a little bit earlier. There was this recent thing where the Girl Scouts posted congratulations to Amy Coney Barrett for being the 5th woman Supreme Court person, and then they tweeted it and then they took it back down because of outcry from certain groups. And what's interesting to me is that a lot of my conservative friends and people who are just sort of off, they're not in the political punditry thing, they had all heard of it. And for them, this was emblematic of the kind of crazy that they see unchecked by the Biden-Harris ticket. Not that they support it, but that they see it as unchecked. And that a lot of my left-leaning friends hadn't even heard of it. And so those divides, all that sort of is percolating in a brew that goes, I feel like there's an overlooking happening again. And that makes me feel like the chance for a Donald Trump victory is similar as last time, that there's a bizarre kind of not likelihood, but there is an increased likelihood beyond the conversation. So I think that's why in my head says that Joe Biden will win, but my gut is preparing for a Donald Trump win.
I have a question, follow up. So some of the people that surprised you, you said that they voted for Donald Trump in 2016, and or
No,
they
voting for Donald Trump this time around, and they didn't vote for Donald
They
Trump in
did not vote for
2016
Donald Trump in
early.
2016. Are they Republican, or are they? What are they registered as?
I don't know. I don't know that.
Okay.
I don't know if they are registered.
Okay.
Do you know
yeah.
who they voted for last in 2016?
That was
No,
he doesn't know.
I didn't ask. I
'Cause-
should. I should know. But
that's where I think we will learn most of the information, how they voted before, especially if they're, and it's just my gut, somebody could correct me, if they're Democrat and they voted for Trump in 2016, because that's where the big surprise was. You know, you had Rust Belt voters, Democrat, disenfranchised Democrats who voted for Donald Trump. I think that's where the surprise is. But if Donald Trump basically has Republicans, I don't know how much, that may weigh into this. I mean, can anybody speak to that?
Well, I mean, just to kind of jump a little bit on this sort of groundswell that I've been sensing, and I didn't vote for Donald Trump, but like it's like that thing with there's an increased number of Hispanic voters that are supporting Trump. There's an increased number of Black voters that are supporting Trump, and all this stuff is sort of around the margins, but it's a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the stuff to me that has my radar up beyond what I've heard as a fair amount of certainty, even in like the podcast that I've been listening to, Left, Right, and Center, and all these other things. There seems to be this a similar kind of wall around the idea that Biden will win, and it does seem really likely. But again, those same blind spots and the same undervaluing of some of these little flashing red buttons has my antenna up.
Missy, do you want to step in?
Sure, I'm Missy. I am a cusper as well, I guess. Xennial, is that what you called it?
I just say Millennial X. That was my little handle from like one of our generational forums. And so usually every time I say I'm a 1981 millennial, somebody has to say you're not a millennial. So I'm like, I'm just creating something here. But I mean,
okay. Well,
I have no problem saying I'm millennial, honestly. But
I'm pretty good with technology, and I also find myself saying kids these days. So wherever that puts me on the spectrum.
Millennial now. We're rising middle ages. The public, the world needs to know this. The world needs to know. We're almost 40, and when I mean it's already started. 1980 cohorts are turning 40, and then once like 1981, Pew Research has 1981 as the start of the millennials. Strauss and Howe, the makers of the 4T theory, has 1982. So point is, once 81ers and 82ers become millennial, I watch it. All the news media is going to be like millennials are now 40. I bet you. That's my prediction. That's my prediction for 2021. Okay, sorry.
Controversial.
Yes. All right.
Okay, so you am I talking about my prediction?
Yeah, because Dan kind of set you up there. That's the only reason why. And we thank you for joining the show, because you're an actual new face. Dan has been with us for the Christian Left video, but you're the new one here, and I thank you very much for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, man. Like, I love this.
Cool.
Yeah, I just a lot of my data is just probably going to be anecdotal and gut feeling based on a lot of conversations, because I just think that social media and news media they have so many blind spots and so many of their own filters and so many of their own ways of bending like the orbit of stories that they share, that they focus on, that they think, like they have this algorithm for the way that they think the world works, and they just like, keep fitting news stories into that algorithm that makes sense to them. But when I talk to people, it's interesting to hear the enthusiasm of Trump voters. Like, I don't meet a lot of reluctant Trump voters. I thought I would, but I don't. The Trump voters I know are very enthusiastic. The Biden voters that I know hate Trump, and it's two really different things.
Mm-hmm.
So Dan knows, like, one of my recent experiences was taking our kids trick-or-treating and really not knowing what we were going to find in the age of COVID. A lot more houses were open than I think even last year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there's a kind of like we're going to do this anyway, no matter what's happening with COVID. Now, some of the houses had like their glass doors shut and they're like little kids pressed against the window being like, hi, take one, and like the candy out on the step. But most people were like, hey, come on over, take a handful. And like, I would just hear like little snippets as I'm, wrangling Halo Master Chief and Wonder Woman down the road. Like, I would hear, like, in the background, someone would say something about voting, and then the other person would respond like, I'm voting for Trump. And the other person would be like, I knew there was something I liked about you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, there's just like, there's a joy. There's like a passion that I encounter, mostly grief, from the friends on the left that I know. They're like, we've got to get this man out of office. Mm-hmm. And grief can only motivate the human heart for so long. People gravitate to joy. People want to feel like things are going to be okay. People want to feel like we have something to be happy about. And it makes me wonder if we'll have a Trump victory, not because of like the most outspoken, passionate, enthusiastic people about either party, but from the people who are so sick of the grief and the gnashing of teeth that is coming from, like, the left's position toward Trump. The left has not offered as much as I think people want to hold on to politically. I don't think that they have offered as many ideas and certainly as many candidates. Like, they had a Ben and Jerry's 31 flavors, in the primaries, and they chose vanilla. They were like, vote vanilla, guys. And just thinking like, well, everybody's going to want ice cream, so they'll pick vanilla. But like, I don't know if they've anticipated the people who were like, bro, I'm a chocolate peanut butter guy, and there's a lot of us out here. Knock it off with this vanilla. Seriously. So I don't know. Those are just some of my thoughts. I think, the Trump enthusiasm that I hear and the Biden discontent that I hear from the left makes me think Trump's going to take it tomorrow.
I saw a meme earlier today that basically said, you guys keep painting the most vanilla candidate ever as the socialists. Like, and he was basically making fun of that idea. So it's funny that that's the second time I've heard Biden described as a vanilla. Dan, did you have a follow-up on that? I saw your hand raised. You're that guy, Dan.
I did it.
You're that guy.
Missy and I are actually in the same room.
Okay.
And so we've been trying to control the sound situation.
Cool.
I wanted to add that, again, I know both Missy and I are speaking anecdotally, but the place where we're feeling these rumblings, and we're seeing enthusiasm and lack of enthusiasm and all these intangibles of like posture and how they might translate into voting and stuff, it's in suburban Charlotte. And this is where a lot of the pundit class is saying that the Biden stronghold should be. It's in white suburbia. This is supposed to be the place where a lot of the switches happened, where the gun control debates and all this other stuff, where all that stuff is supposed to have chipped away at Trump's allure, is in white suburbia. And again, you know, it's a very, very small sample size, but I've heard enough of this kind of thing echoed. I have a friend in California who is a producer and on a show, you know, he's deep in progressive Hollywood. And he was like, Dan, you'd be shocked. You'd be shocked at the number of people who like behind closed doors are like, you know, I know what my taxes will be with Trump. And like, because they're well off and they're in the entertainment industry and they don't want their taxes to go any higher. And so there's this curtain in like the white middle class that's actually fairly intact when it comes to the Trump vote. Again, none of this means that Trump will win. This is just the kind of thing that people will scratch their heads about in 2 weeks from now and wonder why he did win if he does. I think it'll be because of the collective margin tipping stuff of this kind of thing. So Missy and I had an experience in suburban Charlotte. We both kind of looked at each other like, what's going on? And it was like it was just in trick or treating.
And I guess basically you're saying that people were taking off their mask that night, Halloween night.
And there was a kind of relief, you know, there was like when people say they voted for Trump, there was like oh yeah, like, okay, I'm okay saying that to you. Good. Because that's really like, it's just fascinating.
So the poll, we had a pre-show and you guys weren't part of it. So I'm just going to bring up one of the questions that I had yesterday when we had a little pre-show. Right now, it looks like the polls are in favor of Biden. And I don't believe that this is 2020. I do believe that the anti-Trump vote is strong. And I don't think we have a situation in 2016. This is anecdotal, where in 2016 there was an anti-Hillary vote. Like, she just was not likable, and so, and maybe people didn't. It wasn't like I'm going to vote for Trump because I hate Hillary, but it's more like I'm not going to vote at all because of Hillary. And I do believe it. I do get the sense that in 2020 there is more participation, that there won't be a lot of people who are just going to sit at home and not vote. So all that said and done, I think I do trust the 2020 votes a little bit more. But to your point, the Halloween mask, I do wonder if there are people who say they're going to vote for Biden and then may switch it up in a booth. And I brought this point up yesterday, and it actually got
not vote.
And it got a big response from Alice. Your turn. What do you have to say?
Yeah, so I guess I should introduce myself. My name's Alice Bell. I'm a student at the University of Texas at Arlington, studying accounting and finance, and I've been basically like obsessing over a lot of different election data and polling data and stuff like that for weeks at this point. And from looking at it from a data perspective, and I can talk about anecdotes as well. I mean, I'm obviously Gen Z. Pretty much everyone that I know has already voted for Biden. And that level of turnout also seems to pan out in the data, where we're seeing not only record-breaking turnout in general here in Texas, but record-breaking turnout among young people here in Texas.
Where do you live, by the way?
Like I said, I'm at the University of Texas in Arlington. So Arlington, Texas,
okay.
right in the middle of the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
And you're from Texas in general. You're from
Texas. Yeah. I'm from. I grew up in Sherman, Texas, which is a very different kind of place than here. It's kind of rural, and then like right now, I'm right in the middle of suburbia on a college campus, and then I've spent some time in Galveston as well, which is sort of its own little kind of place. Again, purely from the data, I not only think that Biden is heavily favored to win, I think that Biden is at least slightly favored to win Texas. And the reason why I say this is because when you look at all of the different, and again, I mean, it's polling. The polling could be wrong, although it wasn't actually that far off in 2016. Some people just ran away with a few assumptions and, all of these undecideds and so on and so forth. In fact, the polls were actually more wrong in 2012. They just swung the other way. But that's beside the point. If you're looking at, all of the polling data that we've had in Texas for months, Biden is outrunning Beto O'Rourke among whites in this state by about 10 points. And if you look at, those same polls, they show pretty much a statistical tie. The question is, or that a lot of people have is, okay, so Biden is running 10 points ahead of Beto. He also seems to be underrunning Hispanic voters in Texas. But when you look at polls from Univision, Telemundo that are conducted in Spanish, he's performing just the same with Hispanic voters here as Beto and Hillary Clinton did. If you put these two things together, the demographics of this state, how likely people are to turn out, the early vote turnout that we have had and where those early votes are, and you compare that to the areas that Beto O'Rourke improved on in 2018 from Hillary Clinton, and just from a purely data standpoint, you come out with a figure of Biden on average winning Texas by around 2 points. So, I mean, that's my argument. It's purely data driven, and surely you could say the data will be wrong or could be wrong or whatever. I think that 2016 kind of broke a lot of people's brains in regards to probability and regards to like trust in polls and trust in data that actually wasn't that far off that year, was extremely close in 2018 once we started actually waiting for education, because that was the biggest problem in 2016. So anyway, yeah, like I said, I guess I could also add, I also think that even more likely than Biden winning here, I think the Democrats are going to flip the state house. And part of the reason for that is because the Republicans drew up a map in 2010 after the midterm that now is actually worse for them than a nonpartisan map would have been, just because of the way that urban areas have grown out into what were suburbs have grown out into what were rural areas, and so on and so forth. So they've kind of shot themselves in the foot with their gerrymander that they made a decade ago here. But anyway, yeah, that's my argument basically, is that the data from the way that I look at it indicates not a certain Biden victory, but one that's more likely than not. And I think that if Biden is winning Texas, he's probably winning a lot of other places in the country as well. I know that we've seen similar trends in the data in Georgia, in Arizona. I'm not as familiar with North Carolina specifically, so I can't speak to that as much.
And North Carolina is one of the, I believe we find out polls close around 7:30 in North Carolina. Anybody?
North Carolina,
Georgia and North Carolina are like among the first states.
Yeah, and results in North Carolina will get them pretty quickly. Like I think I saw that most will have within about a half hour. So we'll have a pretty good idea.
In Pennsylvania is 8 o'clock. Pennsylvania is 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock Eastern, I think. Yeah, I think Pennsylvania and Texas is 7 Central, which is 8 o'clock Eastern. So.
And I
think North Carolina will be they'll be able to count votes as late as November 12th. Like,
yeah, it's just
the Supreme Court opened that up, but I'm sure that they may or may not be decisive depending on how close it is.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Most of the votes, I'm just saying that most of them I've read will be counted within about a half hour, or released within about a half hour, because they're starting to count like mail-in votes even as we're speaking right now.
Yeah. And over 60% of registered voters in North Carolina have already voted.
Exactly. So because of that, we'll get results from North Carolina pretty quickly, but Pennsylvania might take days. So if the election hinges on Pennsylvania, it's going to be very stressful for everyone in the country, regardless of.
Do we want to pivot to Chaz?
Exactly. I'm opening the door. Go on, Chaz.
But Amy, Texas, Oh,
All right. All right. We'll stay on Texas.
Yeah.
Go on, Amy.
Okay, well, I just want to follow up on some of the things. And first of all, I'm Amy, and I live in Texas, and I'm Alice's mom, and I live in Galveston, and I grew up in Illinois, and I've been here in Texas for 15 years. The last 2 years, and I'm going to disclose this, I have been working with Democratic grassroots organizations in Texas to flip Texas. So, you know, I agree with everything that Alice said about the data. I've been looking at all the same stuff. I've been looking at this data for 2 years. And I know what's going on, what the grassroots organizations, and there's a whole lot of them, how they've been doing massive voter registration, reaching out to minority communities, getting them involved. And I just want to say that as far as Democrats in Texas go, they're excited. You know, it's not, oh, Biden, I guess he's better than Trump. That is not how we're feeling at
Was
all.
Beto a nice appetizer that warmed them up?
Yes, Beto, my gosh, yes. If Biden flips Texas, then we should just build monuments to, you know, Beto down here, I guess. I don't know, but
and then Jen Alpha will take those monuments down in 2055.
Right. But no, he really did a lot to energize the Democratic base, and it was. I think it was a lot of things converging at the same time. 10 years ago, when my kids were younger and they were like junior high-ish, and you know, I'm just being around all these young kids from very conservative homes and watching them grow up, I started feeling 10 years ago, oh my gosh, when these kids get old enough to vote, they're going to flip this state. They're going to flip this state, because this is not, Texas is changing. And then we've had so many people coming in from other places in the country moving into Texas over the course of the last many years. And so demographics, as far as we're the third youngest state in the country, we're a majority minority state. There's more minorities that live in this state than white people. We have a pretty sizable Asian population who tend to lean Democratic outside of the Hispanic vote and the black vote. And so you have all of these things converging together with these huge demographic changes, and then the excitement around the Beto O'Rourke campaign in 2018 that woke everyone in Texas up and went, oh my gosh, if we get out there and vote, we can win. And so I just, I think that while everyone is focusing on Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, and I think it's great that they're focusing on them, but I think that Texas, what's happening in Texas is the story that could very well be what everyone is talking about the day after the election is over with. And I'm just going to wrap up and say that besides Texas, I have also, through my work with grassroots organizations and campaigns in Texas, I've also met other people from Georgia who are grassroots organizers who have worked with the Stacey Abrams grassroots organization, also doing the same kind of work that we're doing here in Texas, getting people registered, getting people out to vote. And so I think that Biden is going to win both Texas and Georgia. And I think that the media is starting to pick up on, hey, there's something going on in Georgia. They're finally picking that up the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I noticed that was the flavor of NPR.
Yeah, and I think that they're also not realizing that we have those same dynamics going on in Texas. Now, last few days they started to notice, because the polls have come out dead even. But yeah, I think that what's happening in this country is the Midwest, which used to be considered the blue wall, is getting redder because it's older and it's aging, and the South is young and it's more diverse. And I think that you're going to see a flip over the next decade or so where the Midwest becomes the red part of the country and the South becomes the blue part of the country. That's where I see it heading in the long term.
So John Cornyn is the Republican incumbent in the Senate seat here. He's basically just a generic Republican. And by being a generic Republican, that is not being Donald Trump, he has a little bit more support than Trump does. And when you use the same kind of analysis to break down demographics, comparing the polling data with Trump and with Cornyn, then you see basically that Cornyn will probably run about 3 percentage points ahead of Trump when everything is said and done on election night. And because Biden is unlikely to win Texas by that much, then I would say that it's pretty straightforward that Cornyn should also win, although it will probably be a closer race than many people are expecting. I was going to add that in 2018, we kind of saw a similar thing where Beto outran basically every other Democrat, way outran the governor candidate, but that's a separate set of issues. But aside from in the governor's race, because at the time Abbott was extremely popular, aside from in the governor's race, all of the other like Republicans, generic Democrats, just your standard race, Beto outran the Democrats again by say like 3 or 4 points, somewhere in there. And I think it's a similar thing where people may have different reasons for not liking Trump or not liking Cruz, but they both of these people seem to carry some additional baggage that just standard Republican doesn't quite carry in this state. That said, even in 2018, with the kind of shift that we saw for Democrats in general in the suburbs that year, even if that's held and we have the turnout that we had in cities and in the Rio Grande Valley, that we had in 2016, because turnout in a lot of the urban areas and down along the border was actually less in 2018 than it was in 2016. If that kicks back up to to that sort of level or higher, which it seems to be from early voting, then there might be some other Democrats, maybe not in the Senate race because Cornyn is such a powerful Republican, although nobody seems to know who he is, but maybe some other races, like railroad commissioner or something like that, where we also have some surprises this year. That remains to be seen. So yeah, I think that Cornyn will also win because Biden is going to outrun MJ Hagar just because of like a small sliver of mostly white suburbanites that seem to be willing to split ticket here.
Yeah, and to add to that, I just want to say about Texas specifically, every place has their own culture, and I really do believe that for the most part, people in Texas are conservative, but they're moderate conservatives. And I know that sounds weird because we have Ted Cruz as our senator, but a lot of the Republicans, especially the older Republicans in Texas, they're George Bush Republicans. They're not Donald Trump Republicans. And so, John Cornyn is completely acceptable to them, whereas someone like Donald Trump or Ted Cruz is not. Just not. They don't like that. They're just, they're conservative. They're traditionalists. Mm-hmm. So a lot of them will not vote for Trump and vote for Joe Biden and vote for Republicans the rest of the way down. that I do believe that will happen. I do believe there'll be a lot of split ticket voting with Republicans here in Texas. So yeah, which will help, which is another reason why Biden, this could very well be the year that Texas, they've been talking about Texas flipping blue for 10 years, and it might be this year because of that we have split ticket voting.
That's going to be a big prediction. I think that may be the biggest prediction, but out of all, I mean, like whether or not Biden or Trump wins, that's kind of boring. I think the Texas thing, that's interesting. That's 20.
I think Georgia's is just as exciting, really.
Okay.
I said the other day, it would be very funny if Biden won both Texas and Georgia, but lost Florida by like 200 votes.
My name is Chaz Andrews. I was born in 1988, Pennsylvania native, from Eastern Pennsylvania. And I consider myself more of a cusper between X and millennial for various different reasons. I would have to say that the youth vote now is being inspired by the demand from society to be more civically engaged. Before now, there wasn't really much of a pressure from the rest of society to be engaged. Sure, there was some shaming going on that, oh, you weren't involved. It's on you. It was more of an onus on the individual rather than it's a group effort. This time around, I'm getting, at least from what I see from text campaigns and letter writing campaigns and all sorts of get out the vote campaigns, it's all geared towards meeting the young people where they are than trying to scold them into doing what their parents and grandparents would have found acceptable. So I would definitely say getting out the vote is important, and it is something that the younger people are taking, especially Gen Zers, are really taking to heart more so than earlier generations did, where the onus was left up to the individual. And I think it's because we're moving more into a civically minded society, which asks more of people than what you as an individual can contribute.
And when
I think that really just goes into generational theory in general. Of we're now getting out of that latent third turning mindset of individualism uber alles, and now moving more into a communitarian mindset.
So working in some Strauss and Howe, the youth now fit the hero archetype, the civic. And so do you think, and millennials were supposed to fit that as well. Millennials born between 1981, early 80s to in the 80s and 90s, babies. There's debate on when it ends, but basically millennials are also supposed to be the hero generation, the civic generation. And now it seems like Gen Z is in the spotlight and capturing that title. Do you think that if Gen Z creates a big splash in 2020, just like millennials did in 2008 with Obama, do you think that the youth will continue that? Do you think that they'll vote in the midterms and carry that energy?
I actually
there's no hope for the future.
I want to believe.
Doomed.
All right, so I want to believe, yes.
And that's what I'm worried about.
Past history tells me to not get my hopes up, but I want to believe that Generation Z will be like the greatest generation, and that the millennials will be like the interbellum before them, and that those are names for the two halves of the GI generation. So that essentially together they helped solve the Great Depression and World War II. Interbellums mostly coming of age prior to the Great Depression and during it, and the bread and butter of the CCC and the WPA and such. And the greatest coming of age, being children during the Great Depression, but coming of age just in time to pick up a gun and go fight or be a nurse in a whack during World War II. So I want to say it all really comes out to see if this civic engagement that's demanded of Z is reciprocated and appreciated by society. If it's not appreciated, I have fears that we'll slip back into what happened with millennials, and that, okay, well, you don't appreciate, well, then I'm going to take my vote and go elsewhere, kind of thing.
And I'm going to drop in some links to Strauss and Howe and Pew Research in the comments for anyone that's not familiar with what Chaz is talking about. And I'm also sprinkling my predictions like throughout the show. And to your point, I do fear that if Trump wins in 2020, that we may create another lost generation. That there may be a disenfranchised generation that will probably not be civically engaged, and all the social theories, Strauss and Howe theories, may be wrong. So I think this is a test.
It's funny. I think that if Trump were to win, that it would actually create a extraordinary vigor. I actually think that we would start to hear little rumblings about cessation and stuff from like the punditry class and that sort of thing. I'm not kidding.
I agree too. I think I agree with that.
Yeah. Going anywhere. That would be a bunch of rich people talking their asses off.
I want to hear why you agree, but the only reason why I disagree, I believe this goes into maybe a debate on what's called the great champion, Strauss and Howe great champion theory. That I know, I'm opening a can of worms, and this may be another episode. I'm just going to say, within the theory, the leader is almost crowned king or queen by the civic generation. And so, therefore, I guess we have to really examine the poll numbers and the stats. Who did the young people overwhelmingly vote for? And did they get their king or queen? And so that's just my belief. Cole, what do you think? You're a core millennial, so.
Right, yeah, I'm I guess you could say we're towards the end.
But okay.
So yeah, my name's Cole, as in Nat King Cole, Jermaine Cole. I'm a millennial, 1994 from Maryland. And my prediction,
because all millennials make Nat King Cole references.
Yeah. Hey, I'm a music guy, so. But yeah, my prediction is more macro, which is that there will be a popular vote blowout in Biden's favor that's driven by millennials and Gen Zers. And here's the numbers. If even half of the millennials vote this year, and then 60% of the ones who do vote Biden, then that's 11 million additional voters for Biden, just between the ages of 24 and 39. And that takes Biden.
The important thing is, where are those 11 million?
Right, exactly, right.
Located.
Although, after a certain point, I look back at the popular vote margins. After a certain point, you just don't win. So
it's about 4 or 5 points is what the estimates are for this specific year.
Correct. So just with millennials, if even half of us vote and 60% cut for Biden, that's 77 million votes for Biden.
And how many have voted before?
Right. So there's 83 million millennials by the Pew definition, 1981 to 1996. And 23 million, so about 27% voted in 2016. And then 42% of the generation voted in the midterm. So I'm actually playing it very conservative by saying that only half will vote. And then after that, if you add on Gen Zers, which Pew defines as 1997 onward, about 24 million of them are voting eligible. And even if Gen Z's turnout were to stay the exact same from 2018, which was 30%, Biden will break 80 million votes. And that's just with people under 40. Add on the fact that Biden is stronger than Hillary with older voters, and that college-educated suburban women swung for Democrats in the midterm. I'm expecting a popular vote gap at least as large as the one between Obama and McCain. And it'll probably be bigger because the Republicans, they've been stuck at 62 million since 2004. And I don't see Trump staying within that like 3 million vote margin that he needs to hold off Biden. He'd have to get to about 76, 77 million. And I mean, that means he has to get 15. So it just may be insurmountable. So that's my prediction. It'll be a blowout in the popular vote, at least in the Obama-McCain like sort of margin. So I do agree with Dan that Trump supporters are definitely more enthusiastic when it comes to their candidate. Like, just putting my views out there, I'm a Bernie and Warren type of person. I didn't like Hillary. I don't like Biden, but I'm voting for Biden. So I think people are just, yeah.
You basically answered the question of your 2016 vote without saying it. So you're voting for Biden, but in 2016.
Right. So
Yes.
I live in Maryland. I did vote for Democrats, but I actually didn't vote for either Trump or Hillary. But this time I feel like I should vote for Biden, and that's what I did. So
yeah, I think that's really common too, like both among people on this panel and people in general, is that like.
And I want to add, I was an independent before, the whole Bernie thing. So I think I'm the same as a lot of 90s babies, but probably millennials. Well, even though a lot of them were Obama supporters, but for those of us who came at the end, we've never been fans of, the party system. But this year I see a lot of people who, just think Biden needs to win. They're tired of the unpredictability, the chaos, the arguing. They want Congress to do something, not argue about doing something.
Are you saying they want a boring guy?
They want functionality. That's what they want.
Anybody while we're on that subject, anybody have a quick prediction for Mitch McConnell? Because I think he's been the constant.
McConnell's going to be reelected.
He'll survive.
No.
He's going to win.
Okay.
Yeah, and I wanted to follow up about what Cole said about the excitement. And here again, I'm talking about being in the South, and I'm speaking for Texas, and I'm probably speaking for people in Georgia too. People on the left in the South are excited not because it's Biden, just because they finally feel like they're going to get a breakthrough and they're going to get their voices heard. That's where the excitement comes from. Not so much Joe Biden, but just the South has been so Republican for so long that people on the left that weren't in the Republican club were just ignored and felt, disenfranchised. And so I think they're excited about the fact that at least they're going to have a voice. So that's where the excitement comes from, not necessarily Biden. And I do believe that the left is so big, from moderate to, the Joe Biden crowd to the Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, but they're all coming together to vote for Joe Biden this year, where back in 2016, a lot of the young people did not. They voted third party. And they're not doing that this year. They're just really not. That's what the polls are showing. Very few people are voting for the Green Party. They're on board. So,
Chaz, you're independent, and you're also
currently I'm not an independent, but
okay.
I consider myself still an independent.
And do you consider yourself core
that's
millennial?
Only because of the way Pennsylvania. forces things.
Do you consider
in
yourself
pe-
core
in
millennial, or
terms of party registration.
is it like 1988 cohort? Is that core millennial, or are you like part of the cusp?
I would consider, especially in the area where I grew up, part of the cusp.
Mm-hmm.
Just simply because I grew up in a much more rural area than you did in where you grew up in a much more urban area.
You mean Philly? Go on, you
For
can say it.
comparisons.
There's only Philly. Or maybe Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I grew 50 miles away from where you grew up, so
I don't even know where you grew
there's
up.
that difference.
Yeah.
So with regards to Pennsylvania and the excitement I see here, I see a lot of what Dan and Missy were talking about with regards to, the one, a lot of talking in a little bit in code, but a kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge sort of thing with regards to COVID specifically and masks of, it's all going to be over in a few weeks anyway. Like, once the election's come and gone, it's not going to matter anymore. COVID is just going to magically vanish. Like, it's not going to be important. That leads into a bunch of talks of excitement of Trump that matches a lot of what Dan and Missy have mentioned with regards to North Carolina and anecdotes. I go to the local Boyertown YMCA. Again, that's probably self-selecting an environment there with regards to what you can hear. But similar conversations when I'm just getting ready to go for an early morning swim are abound there. With regards to, though, the state as a whole, I do think it's going to remain a purple state because Pennsylvania has almost always been a purple state throughout the history of the country. I mean, we're talking going back to Thomas Jefferson, and ever since then, it's been a purple state. It's going to remain a purple state because this state as a whole is more of a collection of city-states than it is one unified culture in and of itself. And you could roughly divide that into eastern and western halves of the state, but it's predominantly city-state. And how you win Pennsylvania is you go to all those city-states and you get out as much as you can in those individual city-states. And that's why I'm going to be focusing on election night with regards to Pennsylvania on certain counties that are interesting with regards to the cities and what they mean for city-states. Like, I'll be watching to see if Biden flips Luzerne County back, which has Wilkes-Barre. I'll be watching Northampton, which has Bethlehem and Easton in it. Coal country, essentially, with those two. And they're not that far from his native Scranton with there. I'll be watching to see if he gets Erie, Pennsylvania back. Because Erie, the only last time Erie went for a Republican before Donald Trump, it was George H.W. Bush in 1988. So I'll be watching that. I'll also be looking at Chester County now that I look at it, because Hillary actually flipped Chester County blue when Chester County has been the historic home of the Republican Party in Pennsylvania since the Republican Party was founded. It's given some of our notable Republican senators and governors going back history far back. And she somehow flipped it blue. And I'll be interested to see if Biden can build upon that in Chester County. And I think a lot of that probably has to do with northern Chester County, which goes along the Schuylkill River, having a lot more younger millennials settling there, especially around Phoenixville and Spring Township and Royersford. Well, Royersford's across the river, but
Sidebar.
You get the picture. Right along the school corridor, there's a big settlement of young millennials that I think have flipped a traditional Republican stronghold in Pennsylvania blue.
How's Franklin County?
And that's freaking people.
That's where I was born, Chambersburg. So how's Franklin County? I haven't been following it.
Oh, Franklin's gonna be red. It's gonna be red.
That's what I was thinking.
It's gonna be red.
Yeah.
It's in the middle of
was all over the place.
You know, on the thing that Chaz was saying about how Pennsylvania is a purple state, it reminds me that like a lot of like the colonies, you know, like New Hampshire and Massachusetts and stuff, that there is this surprising like blue color Republican enclave in those places. And so here's a prediction. I wonder if New Hampshire is close, we might be in for a long night. I think if that,
yes.
I was looking at some of the data today, and New Hampshire was tight, and it was our first thing in 2016 of going, there's something different than we were looking for. And so I wonder if that dynamic holds and there is that, you know, white blue collar surge again, that we might be in for like but New Hampshire may not have the same millennial demographic surges that places like Texas and others have. But
something that I might add, I agree.
And the other thing to go along with that.
No, go on.
You finish your thought, Alex.
If New Hampshire seems close, like anywhere remotely close, then it could very well be a very long night. I agree with that. I question the likelihood of that happening. Again, due to polling data showing Biden way ahead when Clinton was not anywhere. Like, I mean, New Hampshire was considered to be close in 2016, and then it was closer than I think even people were expecting based on the polling data. But also because in New England, at least, there is not currently a single Republican representing a congressional district in all of New England. Wow. And that is in part because of districts in New Hampshire that they lost in 2018, in addition to other places. So, you know, I mean, one thing that I do definitely believe is true is that trends from 2018, I think an argument could be made that they might stall, but I don't see them reversing.
And to build off of that, Alice, especially when you consider Pennsylvania, I would say that the bigger trend is that Pennsylvania is going to become a progressive populist purple state. In that the divide will be whether you can get Republicans to stir up the populist Republican blue collars, as Dan would mention, or will the Democrats get someone out like Pennsylvania's Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, because John Fetterman managed to basically sweep not just Western Pennsylvania, but a good portion of Pennsylvania, red tea that everyone talks about on CNN, and get them to vote for him.
We're talking about where I was born.
Ticket. So,
you're talking about Chambersburg?
I would say, and yeah, Fetterman is a Bernie-crat, essentially. So if you want to win Pennsylvania, you're going to have to either appeal to populism on the Republican side, or you're going to have to appeal to progressivism. This neoliberal, neocon game of standard issue Republican, standard issue Democrat is not going to get you far. It's going to be a game of who is more progressive or who's more populist, and that goes back to historical trends too.
Amy?
I just wanted to make hopefully one last comment. First of all, I forgot to say what generation I'm with, and I'm like the old lady in the room. I am technically a Gen Z, but I am actually a cusper. Or Gen X. I'm sorry. I'm not. No, that would make me the young one.
Boomerang.
Yeah. Okay. That was my senior moment.
He's boomerang.
But no, I'm like Ryan, being right there on the line between, you know, what year are you, one year older, and I would have been a boomer. So yeah, and I just want to say that the first election that I ever voted in was Ronald Reagan and Walter Mondale. So that's how many elections I participated in. And this is a historic election. I've never seen anything like this in my life. The turnout, the enthusiasm, and I don't doubt that it's not there on both sides. It really is. But I think that this is one that's going to go down in the history books. And I remember Obama, 2008. That was exciting. That was fun. This is different. This is urgent. This is not, oh, isn't this cool that we'll, get this exciting person? No, that's not what's going on here. I think there's an urgency on both sides, and that's why we have such high voter turnout. So,
Dan and Missy, I think we're about to lose you. Thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait.
Thank you.
To continue to chat. Maybe we'll bookend this with a post-election show and get your take. So, well, thank you again. All right, we'll continue.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for joining us.
So I guess Dan, you're gonna miss when I speak. What I was gonna say was that pretty much I would be redundant and superfluous because everything that you said was what I was gonna say.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
Makes
just
you
want
feel
to
less
say
crazy.
that I watched you, Dan, on the one that you did with Ryan, what was
Christian
it?
left.
Guy from
Christian
Rutland
left.
Barbers.
You were awesome, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So it was fun being on a panel with you.
Thanks. I can't wait to do it again.
All right, so we're back in with our special elections prediction episode. We lost Missy and Dan, but we have Cole Mitchell and Ann Hemenway. And you were with us for the Boomer episode, Baby Boomer episode.
I'm a boomer. Yeah, I am. I know Alice. No, I really am. I mean, I like to identify with Gen X, but I remember Kennedy assassination. That immediately makes me a boomer.
Well,
Boomer is a state of mind. It's not nothing more, nothing less. That's my take.
There you go.
And Colin, how do you identify? We'll just introduce that. Are you millennial or Gen Z?
You mean Cole?
You mean Cole?
Oh, Cole. Sorry, Cole. I'm a baby boomer tonight.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, if you mean this, Cole,
yeah,
I always thought I was a millennial, but Chaz kind of let me know I'm kind of on the cusp between millennial and Gen Z. So,
cool.
Wow.
So we're going to continue the chat. At the people who haven't gone yet, Tommy hasn't shared his prediction, and then Darius, you're after Tommy. So go on, Tommy. You have the floor.
I don't want to take up too much time because I pretty much would be
Oh my God, why is your audio so choppy? Okay, now.
Is it better?
No.
Sounds like you're underwater.
And chewing.
Is this better now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'll try to do it like discreetly so that let me take my headphones off. Is that better now?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So just no one else talk, or else there will be feedback through the computer. So yeah, I was in a lot of agreement with what Dan had to say. I think that if I had to guess, like if someone forced me to choose who I thought would win, I would say probably Biden. But I think that there is ample room for Trump to squeak by another win, which is how I felt in 2016. That I thought that Hillary was most likely to win, but I thought that there was a very feasible path for Trump to win, which ended up happening. And like Dan was saying, that there's these marginal voters that can, swing elections, or he was talking about marginal voters, and I think that those marginal voters can swing elections. And I think, a lot of people, focus on, well, this, suburban white, middle class people that, are on the fence and might go one way or the other. They might make up a small percentage of the voters, but it's like they are the ones who ultimately might decide this election, in the way that 80,000 voters in 3 states gave it to Trump last time. So I know I'm not someone who, disregards the polls. And I think that the polls in 2016 don't get enough credit for how close they actually ended up being to the ultimate outcome. But I still, when I look at the polls, I don't know, because right now Pennsylvania is wider than it was in 2016 from the polling. And so hopefully, and Pennsylvania is supposed to be the decider. So hopefully that means that there's a better chance. I'm not going to lie. I do have a clear person that I'd rather win. I'd rather have Biden win. I think it's be very dangerous for Trump to win again. But I was going to say too, even if Biden, Biden wouldn't need Texas. If Biden wins Texas, he's got more than enough electoral college votes as it is. But I would say Texas is definitely something that I'm monitoring anyways, because I think it would have huge implications for the electoral college discussion in this country. I'm not sure how genuine the arguments a lot of Republicans are making about the electoral college now. I think that if they think that Texas is starting to slip from them, I think that will make them a lot more nervous, and we'll see them flip as quickly as they flipped about nominating Supreme Court judges in an election year. How they were easily able to flip on a dime. We'll see how quickly that changes when Texas starts looking like it's not in their corner so much, or it can't be relied on as much, because it has so many electoral college votes. So I think that
have more in the future.
I'm sorry?
I said it will only have more in the future.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. It's only going to be more and more likely probably that Texas flips, and at that point it might make it, the electoral college might make it harder for a Republican to win. And then all of a sudden they're going to be like, oh, you know what? Actually, all those arguments we made in favor of the electoral college, we don't agree with them anymore. And so, but I will also say I'm not from Texas. I'm in New England, so I don't know what the situation is down there on the ground. But I'm in the numbers that I'm seeing, I'm not as bullish on Texas as Amy and Alice are. But it's certainly, it's interesting to see how close it is, and it's certainly something that I plan on monitoring. Yeah.
And we talked about, what in the world? You guys
Tommy, I have to be bullish on Texas because that's my job.
Was that the feedback coming from Tommy?
Tommy, yeah.
Yeah, I just put in my headphones.
Okay. Hey,
Yeah,
while we're messing up here, do you have anything to add to what we were talking about New England earlier? Can anybody recap that for Tommy to follow up on?
Yeah. Well, so we were talking about Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and I was going to say, it's obviously the numbers are the proportions are not the same as Pennsylvania, but it's actually the same with New York and a lot of, just because it's the eastern coast, as you get more western in a lot of these states, you get more rural and red. And so that's the same thing in Massachusetts. It's the same thing in Connecticut. It's the same thing in New York. What's always interested me though is that New Hampshire is to the east of Vermont, but Vermont is super liberal, or more progressive than New Hampshire is. But in general, just the eastern seaboard is very urban and liberal, and then the more west you get into almost any state in New England, more inland and western you will start running into more rural and conservative voters. But it's not the same proportions as it is in Pennsylvania, where in Pennsylvania there are enough rural and less urban areas that they can actually swing elections, whereas like in Massachusetts, there's not, and in Connecticut, for example, there's just not enough of that vote. There's not enough people in those places to make it a purple state, you know? Yeah.
That was me that time. Hey, that doesn't happen much. All right. So, Ann, can you speak to your area, where you're from? I'll give you the floor.
I'm a Chicagoan. I mean, Illinois is going to go blue. The Chicago and the suburbs and the Chicago suburbs absolutely overwhelm any other part of. It's not even an issue. Honestly, I know, I think that like those in California, Chicago, Illinois is deep blue. And then, you add Obama, favorite son to that. And it's a non-issue. Same with our senator. Durbin's going to get reelected. It's a shoo-in. So I'm not particularly concerned about it. Wisconsin is an issue. Michigan is and Indiana is a lost cause. That's a Trump. Although didn't it go for Obama in 2008?
It did in 2008. And what will be interesting to watch about Indiana is that there's some polling that I've seen that shows, although Trump is way ahead of Biden, he's only about half as much ahead of Biden as he was ahead of Hillary Clinton in Indiana. Yeah. So if there's that same kind of shift everywhere in the Midwest, then Trump doesn't have a whole lot of room to win, but that it might just be, something weird going on in Indiana.
Well, Indiana, Southern Indiana, his home, they're clan there. You can get Gary, you can get Indianapolis, you can get, I think Amy can attest that rural Illinois has its issues as well. And somehow the rural people haven't figured out that Trump doesn't give a damn about that. But, it's whatever their pet issue is. I don't really know, but I'm not very worried about Illinois. It looks like Biden is doing very well in Wisconsin. So in terms of the Midwest, there's Iowa, which is just weird. But I lived in Iowa for a couple of years and it's pretty white. It's like a really white place. And it's got an enormous farming and agribusiness area to it. So if it's hard to know, and it's agribusiness now. It's not just small farmers, it's agribusiness. So it's hard to know. But I'm not, in terms of Illinois, I'm not concerned. I am. One thing I want to mention about voting and boomers is my brother-in-law, who's a boomery boomer. He came from lower middle class, very smart, worked his way up, made a ton of money, all about his money. And he lived in Florida. And his wife, who is a good friend of mine, basically talked him into not watching Fox News. Because she said, you know what? It just raises your blood pressure. You're just so angry and, you have to worry about your health. And so he stopped, and slowly over time, they left Florida because they couldn't stand it anymore. He was horrified by the handling of COVID in Connecticut, in Florida, and they moved up to Connecticut. And now he's a registered Democrat, and he voted for Biden because it was the COVID. He's a scientist. It turned him against.
I will just say, I wish he would have stayed in Florida until after the election. Then
I had the exact same thought.
Yeah.
They couldn't take another minute of Florida. They had a beautiful house, but they couldn't take near St. Augustine. They just couldn't take another minute.
It's just a joke. Especially with the way they were handling COVID. I wouldn't have wanted to risk staying in that state, to be Let me
And
hope
you
in
know,
2 months.
just to pick up on the COVID thing, I think that Texas under Donald Trump has been through so much. We've had, you know, we were the state that had kids in cages. We were the state where we had a white supremacist drive 8 hours to shoot brown people in a Walmart in El Paso. We were the state who got slammed with COVID just like Florida did. I mean, we have just, this state has just been through such pain
Not
over
to
the
mention the
last 4
farms and
years.
hurricanes.
And I think that that is why we are seeing a lot of people who, you know, are Republicans who are like, you know what, this is just too painful. We can't do this anymore. So I do think that that is affecting it as well.
Yeah, and I mean, like normally I prefer to just go off of data instead of assumptions on what might be causing people to vote one way, but I have had a bit of a theory lately that here in Texas, much like what we saw in the Supreme Court election in Wisconsin earlier this summer, the just brazen attempts at voter suppression and refusal to expand mail-in voting, and you know, you can just go down the list on the part of the GOP here in this state is really turning a lot of people off. And I think that might be part of the reason why turnout is so high, just because Texans being Texans are like, well, you don't want me to vote? I'll show you. I'll vote and I'll vote you out. So, you know, that might play a factor too, but I can't, you know, prove that with any data. But
I also think that Texas, with their ego about Texas, is that when they started getting their big turnout, you know, it's like, well, we're Texans. We got to be the biggest in everything. So now it's like the thing to do. It's, you know,
I definitely felt that way.
Because
I definitely felt that way. I was like for most of the early voting cycle, we had more votes than California, like more people that had voted than California. I was like, hell yeah.
That is seriously how Texans act. They're like, well, no, we got to have the most votes. We got to be the biggest of everybody because they have to be the biggest in everything. So I think that's part of it too. It's just become like, you know, the thing to do.
Cole, you haven't. Oh, who's?
Can I ask Charles a question about Pennsylvania? I don't know whether you got to this or not. So, I mean, with all the court crap, did you already talk about that?
No, I'm glad. I wanted to bring up the court part. Go on.
What's your question?
Yes, indeed. Do you have any sense? I mean, it just seems to be like the Republicans are not stopping.
They're not going to try it. They're going to. Once election day is over, once midnight of tomorrow has come and gone, there are going to be lawyers trying to stop the count of people who mailed in votes, or even like turned in, and they're like sitting there waiting to be counted. They're like, no, election day's over. Stop counting. It's going to be there. I'm already expecting it. I'm already expecting that.
If we don't have
Fortunately, our Supreme Court is sane in Pennsylvania. Oh dear God! Fortunately,
you mentioned sanity. So like a couple of days ago, we had a bunch of we had Trump voters basically trying to run a Biden bus off the road, and I think we're entering election day with that type of mentality roaming around. So I'm worried that if we don't have a decisive winner, that may, and with Trump saying, you know, basically feeding in information about how the results aren't going to be valid, I'm worried that may actually cause some type of uproar. I'm not expecting Civil War, you know, 2.0 or Civil War 2020, but I think that may lead to some type of ruckus, and I'm worried about that.
I would agree. It reminds me the most, and this is probably going to be a reference for Anne and Amy to pick up on, of the first episode, well, the first miniseries of North and South from the 1980s miniseries, where they have at the end of that first miniseries, basically they show you the lead up and the environment of the country in the lead up to the election of 1860, and it is eerily similar. I don't think it's going to get to state seceding or anything like that, but it's going to have the same kind of spillover effect. Where we go from there.
Well, just to pick up on the thing with the Biden bus, that was very upsetting for people in Texas. Now the people on the right, they didn't say a word. You know, I guess they know that that's probably not cool. Unlike Trump. At least
no, okay, hold on. Did you see the response from Alan West?
Oh yeah. Well, he's crazy.
Well, yeah, no, okay.
Okay, he's crazy, but no, I'm talking about the citizens. I did not see anybody on the right in Texas comment on it whatsoever. But there was a lot of fear on, you know, from people on the left in Texas about that. And my concern is that I do think that, as we discussed, the Texas election is going to be a whole lot closer than people are anticipating. If Biden pulls a win, he's not going to win it by a lot. It's, you know, it's going to be close. And I think that if, you know, it's between, if he only wins it by a couple points, which is probably all he's going to win it by if he does, that Trump will absolutely send his lawyers in to try and contest the results. And although I don't think he'll be successful of that, just to sow that doubt while he's contesting it, I'm afraid that the legal battles will spill into the streets in Texas. That's my fear. Because we've already seen a lot of aggressive behavior from Trump supporters, especially in the last few weeks. And I'm not just talking about the Biden bus. I'm talking about the parades and the gatherings, and they've become very, very aggressive, and it worries me. It does. So that's my. I'm excited about the returns to come in. It would be really exciting for Texas to vote for a Democratic candidate for the first time in almost 30 years, but I worry about what the repercussions of that mean.
Yeah, so this actually leads to a question that I wanted to bring up was, I mean, like, obviously, you know, there could be like an isolated incident of violence, but I guess I was wondering how many people think that there might be some, I don't like more than just lone wolf political violence in the aftermath of the election. Particularly, I guess I'm adding my own thing. My own opinion is that I think that there's a maybe not more than likely, but a high probability, or, you know, uncomfortably high probability, particularly if Biden wins, that we might see some, yeah,
So
now.
I'll just really quickly, I agree that there's a high probability that there's political violence, but I disagree with the distinction of probably just if Biden wins. I think that that there's.
Sorry, just to clarify, I don't mean that it's probably just if Biden wins. I mean the probability is higher if
well, I think
Biden
wins. Really what I'm saying, I think that the probability is extremely high either way, and it might. I might argue that it's actually higher if Trump is to win, because
that's interesting.
The reason for that is that I think that a lot of people on the left number one, already kind of see this election as like a matter of life and death for the country as we know it, for democracy. And I just don't know if people are going to like sit by if Trump was to win, especially if there is question about if that was legitimate, because I honestly think that like both sides are kind of convinced that they're definitely going to win and that the other side can only win through cheating. And that's very unfortunate, because ultimately I think that that's the reason why that's going to be what results in a lot of the violence, is that you have people that think that, you know, one side thinks that the Russians stole the election, the other side thinks that the deep state did it or whatever. And I'm not saying that these are two like equally like valid points of view. They're both at least mildly conspiratorial, but that aside, I just think it's going to be chaos either way. And again, I would argue, like, just from a point of numbers, especially because I don't think that anyone has a question of who's going to win the popular vote. If Trump did somehow win the popular vote, I think that there would be a lot of question over if the results were legitimate. That's kind of how I can't help but see this. Is just that there's a lot of people that are already at a point when like they legitimately feel like they have nothing left to lose. And I say this because I know a lot of these people, and I've been convincing them to vote because some of them didn't even want to vote. They were just like preparing for the revolution because they thought it was going to come anyway. I don't want it to reach that point, but I'm very concerned that it might.
Yeah, I did read, I read somewhere that 25% of people in America surveyed felt that if their candidate doesn't win, they will not trust the results of the election. 25%. And that's, you know,
I'm surprised it's that low.
Yeah, but when you think about it, okay, I don't know how that splits out, but let's just say that it splits out evenly. You know, 12% of people can cause a lot of trouble, you know? 12% of the population, yeah, they could do a lot. So
that's 35 million people, something like that. Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of feel like the cat is already out of the bag as far as like potential political violence, because they we talked about this in one of the groups, actually both of the groups a little while ago. This guy named Gilman, he was talking about how they did war gaming, because a lot of people are just looking at the election, but then there's the transition lame duck period that would happen in, you know, a given situation. And they pretty much projected political violence if there was a narrow victory of any sort, or even worse, if somehow ballots were not counted or, you know, stopped from being counted. Like these war game teams were made up of like Democrats and people who worked in the Obama administration, and then actual, like, you know, Republican strategists. And
they have there's a lot of businesses in cities all over the country. They were showing
they're not so
news. They're boarding up businesses, and this is again goes back to what I was saying in the previous recording. Is I've never seen an election like this. We didn't board up businesses because we had an election. So that right there tells you that this is on a different level than what we've seen. And yeah, I agree that there could be violence on either side, regardless of how it goes. And you know, Anne is from Chicago, and most of the people that she knows are, you know, that's the area where she lives. And I have all of these people that are classmates and people I've known my whole life from Central Illinois, and they're showing their Trump videos, you know, their Trump parades. They're on Facebook, you know, they record them, they put them on Facebook. And I just sit there and I look at that and I'm thinking, okay, what world are you living in? Because first of all, you live in Illinois. You can throw all the Trump parades you want, but he's not even going to win Illinois. But they believe he's going to win. And they think he's going to win by a landslide. And they live in a blue state. So it's, you know, it's really incredible.
Yeah, and some of the stuff I was saying about people like on the far left, or maybe not even the far left, I think also applies to people on the right that are convinced that that Trump can't possibly lose, and they might act the same way. That's really the point that I was trying to make, is that I think that the likelihood of political violence is high, whichever way it goes. But I think that the chaos that might ensue from it may be more long-lasting in the event of a Trump victory.
Okay, well, so I was gonna say I think the opposite. Because when she was talking about boarding up businesses, I was gonna say I guess in my thinking is that if Trump were to win, maybe you'd see a little bit of rioting from younger people, perhaps. But I guess I mean I also have anecdotally a lot of people on my news feed talking about the revolution and you know, we need a revolution and voting is, you know, whatever, because the system is totally, you know, messed up, and so we need a revolution. I don't know how many of those people actually would do anything. And
hey,
so
if any of you like leftists are watching this right now, voting is praxis, by the way. So just
yeah, no, I mean, well, and then their argument is that, well, Biden is just as bad, and so there's no point, because they're both just as bad, and they you know, I think there's like this dogma of false equivalence in this country, and that has become like almost its own ideology in this country, but people don't realize that it's an ideology.
Hey, look, for leftists, that's what the leader of the Communist Party in Germany said, and he ended up getting killed by the Nazis. So.
Well, not
that I'm comparing them to Nazis.
No, but
of course there is a neo-fascist.
No, that's actually there were people in Germany when the Nazis were rising. There were communists who on the far left who thought that the Social Democrats, the center left party, was the bigger threat than the Nazis. And I mean, like, again, I'm not trying to compare Trump and his supporters to Nazis, but I do feel like sometimes we are seeing some similarities here in terms of like people talking about that the Democrats are even worse from the far left perspective. You know, and it's like, that reminds me a lot of exactly what people were saying about the Social Democrats during the rise of the Nazis. And then once the Nazis took power, then the communists realized like, oh, the Nazis were worse, but it was too late at that point, and they ended up in concentration camps and getting killed. So, but needless to say, I don't know that a lot of the leftist rhetoric on the left about the revolution, I don't know how serious any of that stuff is. And on the same token, I don't know how serious a lot of the rhetoric is on the far right, but they do have their militias and they are more organized. And so I guess I'm thinking that if Trump wins, there may be some short-term rioting or stuff like that. But I generally expect that probably a lot of the people on the left are just going to be even more docile than I would want in terms of at least
just
protesting.
roll over and die.
Yeah, kind of. It is my fear. But I think with a Biden win, I think, again, it might not come to anything. But, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw militias starting to try to act up a little bit like, you know, we saw already with, you know, in Michigan and things.
So we got Cole Mitchell. You joined us late. Thank you for joining us. And we're definitely happy back when we do I guess coverage or a post-election video. But do you mind sharing your thought real quickly? We have about 4 minutes left. Sharing your thoughts.
Sure. Yeah, I'll keep it brief. You know, a lot of what my prediction is based off of is what I can see here in semi-rural Pennsylvania. I live near Chaz. I'm outside Reading, Pennsylvania. So, you know, Reading Railroad, you know, monopoly and all that. But anyway, I see a lot of Trump flags, you know, yeehaw, big trucks with big flags. So it's like, you know, mini Texas sometimes, I think. But I see a lot of those signs, but I also most of the people I talk to, whether reluctantly or not, say, "Oh, I'm voting for Biden," whether it's, hold your nose, I'm voting for Biden, or they are. So I think it'll go that way. But if someone were to just drive through town, they might be like, "Uh-oh, it's certainly a Trump state." So, Chaz can probably tell you more about it as well. But that's my prediction. So hopefully that was good for you.
So, who wins? Who do you think wins?
Sorry, Biden.
Biden wins.
My prediction is Biden. It might be a little hairy election night, but.
Well, this is a great evening. A lot of predictions here. I love this conversation, and all that said and done, let's see what happens.